All right, we'll make a start. So as I said, my name is Stephen Balkam. I'm the founder and CEO of the Family Online Safety Institute. We're an international nonprofit working to make the online world safer for kids and their families. This back to school season, families throughout the country, and for that matter, in many parts of the rest of the world, are facing new challenges in this rather unusual school year. Kids and teens are returning to classrooms in a variety of ways, including online, hybrid, and in person, alongside anxious thoughts and worry and apprehension. And that's just the parents. We're going to dive into a range of topics and issues facing kids, teens, and parents, from screen time to ed tech, promoting resilience, and even flipped classrooms. And we'd like to hear from you. What is your experience, either as a parent or an educator? Feel free to put your comments and your questions in the Q&A box down at the bottom, and we'll get to these throughout the webinar. Oh, and a quick note, we're going to be recording this session and later post it on our YouTube channel. So, joining me for this vital conversation is a digital literacy educator and advocate, Diana Graber. She is the co-founder of Cyberwise, a leading online safety and digital literacy organization. She is also the founder of CyberCivics, the popular and innovative middle school digital citizenship and literacy program currently being taught in over 40 US states, as well as the UK, Canada, New Zealand, and Africa. And she is the author of Raising Humans in a Digital World, Helping Kids Build a Healthy Relationship with Technology. Welcome and good morning, Diana.
Good morning. Nice to see you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for being with us. Let's just start. Could you just tell us a little bit about both Cyberwise and CyberCivics?
Yeah. So, gosh, Cyberwise was launched about 12 years ago, believe it or not, when I got out of a master's program in media psychology and social change. And one of my classmates, Cynthia Lieberman, and I said, we learned so many great things about kids and digital literacy. We need to tell people about it. So that's why we started Cyberwise. We really tried to bring a lot of the current research regarding technology and kids to the adult space. And that's been great. So our motto is no grown-up left behind, and that's still happening. But in doing that, I realized, gosh, I got to get directly to the kids, So at the same time, my own kids were attending a public charter school in Southern California, Waldorf educational based. And there was a social media incident at their school, which, the first time ever, the principal didn't know what to do. He's pulling his hair out. And so I said, hey, I just finished this master's program. Can we start piecing together these digital literacy lessons? And he said, yes, please start tomorrow. So that's how CyberCivics was born. And I was really lucky to have access to so many academics and educational leaders. And we put together this 3-year curriculum that covers digital citizenship, information literacy, and media literacy. So as part of my day-to-day work, I still teach some classes at our pilot school. And last week was the first time I myself returned to the classroom in over a year. The last day I was there was that March day on a Friday when we learned that we would not be coming back on Monday. And I told the kids, I'll see you in 2 weeks. And it's been a year and a half. So, so I wanted to share some of my own reflections of being back in a classroom after this time when I've been teaching Zoom for a year. And number one is, for the kids, I'm teaching 2 6th grade classes. For them to be in masks seems like no big deal. Like it's just another day in their life. So that was the first thing. The other thing, because I'm teaching digital citizenship, our very first lesson is called our detective lesson, where they take a look at technologies introduced to humans throughout the ages. So we look at the bow and arrow, we look at the telephone, the automobile, and talk about how all these technologies, it was the first time ever. So a lot of people were like, oh no, this is going to change everything. And then slowly humans learn to adapt to these tools and make them work for us. So it was a great conversation to have because we ended with today's tools, the laptop, the cell phone, and we had a wonderful discussion about the pluses and minuses of these tools during the pandemic. And so, the takeaway for me was the kids say, hey, it was great because we could continue school, we could connect with our friends, and when we got stressed out and had nothing to do, we could entertain ourselves. But the bad side is they really are now craving face-to-face interaction. They're so grateful to have that again in their lives.
Hmm.
The best line takeaway yesterday is one little boy said, Zoom was the best thing about the pandemic, and Zoom was the worst thing about the pandemic. So they are zoomed out. And then
Hmm.
the other thing I wanted to say is actually now CyberCivics, we're in 48 US states, which is so cool, and 7 other countries. So I've worked with a lot of teachers over the last year who are delivering our lessons via Zoom. And I have to give credit to educators around the country, at least the ones I worked with. We have to remember they were thrown into this online world overnight with no preparation, no getting ready. And at the end of the year when they're already so tired. And man, I personally engaged with so many teachers, a lot that were formerly tech averse, that rose to the occasion, learned how to use all these ed tech tools literally overnight and in a lot of really innovative and enthusiastic ways. So I think, it has not been a great year and a half, but I think we came out of it with some really bright spots that will carry into the coming months.
Well, okay, thanks for that. So let's just keep looking back a little bit to 2019. And I recall that year very well because it was the year of screen time. This was there were documentaries and there were, congressional hearings, and everyone was tearing their hair out about how our kids were basically, their brains were being turned to mush by spending way too much time on screens. Oh, by the way, parents also were way too much overusing their devices. Where do you think that conversation has gone in the last year and a half, given that, for obvious reasons, screen time actually increased amongst both parents and kids as our work and our school went online? Where have we fallen out on that issue?
Well, I wanted to come to you today and say it's so awesome because we're not talking about time anymore. We're talking about what are they doing online. That's what I wanted to say to you today. But I'll tell you, I did a parent thing yesterday, and we asked for questions ahead of time, and 9 out of 10 questions were about screen time. Like we're still fixed on screen time, and I really want us to get past that because if you talk to kids, they are using that time to do schoolwork, to learn about new things. They go to YouTube and Google I'm using the word Google, but they're searching YouTube for things they want to learn about. And they're talking to their friends about homework. So, we really need to like put the time word in the back and think about the what word. What are they doing online?
Yeah, we talk about screen time and we talk about screen use. So half an hour of mindless video watching is one way of using the screen. Half an hour talking to grandma and interacting with kids that are doing homework with you is quite a different one.
Yeah.
So I like the way you put that, though, the how. A very different topic, and actually something I heard on the radio coming in this morning, teens and mental health, or kids and mental health.
Yeah.
What have you seen? And has there been a deterioration, would you say, overall in kids' mental health? And if so, how can we as parents and teachers foster healthier habits or in some cases, intervene with our kids and students?
Yeah. So this is a really big topic because it goes back to the what in screen time. And we have to remember, of course, screen time rose during the pandemic and kids were on their social media apps, Instagram, TikTok, and all that. So that's where kids are getting their news about current events. And I really urge parents to download those apps yourself and peruse them because kids are learning about coronavirus and climate change and school shootings and all that stuff via these little apps. And it's disturbing content. So that is contributing to this anxiety that kids are feeling. And I really worry about this especially when kids super young are lying about their age to get on these apps and getting exposed to this content largely alone in their rooms. And it's very anxiety. It drives a lot of anxiety and fear. I mean, think about, in the old days, we would sit together with our family and watch the 6 o'clock news and something scary came on and mom was there to say, let me explain this to you. That
Hmm.
doesn't happen anymore. So that's the kind of content that we really need to know that's what our kids are seeing largely on these apps.
So would you say that SEL, social and emotional learning, is having a moment right now? And if so, tell us about why it's so important for us to use that in our schools, and for that matter, at home.
Yeah, well, SEL is definitely finally having a moment. I wish it had had its moment 10 years ago because it would have really helped. But it's nice that schools are placing, a lot of emphasis on this because kids need that support right now for a lot of reasons, not just the pandemic, but what I just mentioned. And that's something that we really baked into the cyber civics curriculum. In a lot of ways, it really is an SEL curriculum because it addresses all these things that kids are dealing with. And I tell you, there has not been a day that I have walked in the classroom and to teach a lesson, whether it be a lesson on fake news or plagiarism or copyright, whatever, that the kids say, guess what happened this week? Or I saw this week. And I'll give you a quick example. A year ago, last September, I taught a Zoom class and Monday morning, and the kid said, Mrs. Graber, you're not going to believe what we saw on TikTok. We saw a man commit suicide. And I'm like, what? And
Mm,
holy cow, 3/4 of the kids had either seen it or heard about it. And it did happen. You can look at,
mm,
I wrote an
mm.
article about it for Psychology Today. But this is the kind of stuff the kids saw, but we were able to talk about it. And we literally derailed that class. We spent the hour just talking about how did that get up there, what to do when you see something like that, who to tell, how to report it. These are the kind of things that kids really need time to talk about because it is a huge emotional event.
It's interesting. Last year, we did research into parental attitudes and use of parental controls.
Yeah.
This year, we're flipping it on its head, and we're asking teens and young people about their attitudes and use of online safety tools. And these are the ones that have been developed for teens and young people on TikTok, on Snapchat, on YouTube, on Twitter, to allow them to report and block and remain private, etc. Not surprisingly, they have a very, very positive view of those tools and not such a positive view of parental controls. So I would urge, as the SEL, the social emotional learning work continues, we incorporate the discussion of technology tools that can actually help kids get agency and some control over what it is they're seeing.
That is such important work. I'm so glad to hear that because, when you think about where a kid is developmentally at 13, 14, they want that control. It's their time to, detach from their family of origin, figure out who they are. They hate to be told what to do. And when they discover it's like not mom telling you what to do, it's your phone that's controlling you. They love to have that agency to be able to say, look, I don't want to be bothered after this time of night. I don't want this person to send me these messages. I think it's so important to give kids that power. I will say one thing about that though, because I hear this a lot from my students that they see things that they find disturbing or inappropriate on TikTok and they report it and they hear nothing. They
Hmm,
feel like it doesn't work when they report things. And again, this is just the microcosm of the kids that I talk to, but
sure.
it's that's disturbing to hear because I think if the kids are going to show that agency, we want the social media apps to step up to the plate and let the kids know that they hear them. I think that will be really important.
No, absolutely. And full disclosure, TikTok is a member of FOSI, as is Facebook and Twitter and all of these social media organizations. And we put a lot of effort into talking to them about upping their trust and safety game, about getting responses, even if it's just automated, even if it's literally, thank you, we're looking into this. That at least
Right.
gives someone a feeling that someone's already heard me and it's going to. So we'll definitely take your comments and any other comments that we get in the Q&A down below, back to these companies.
That would be
Um,
great.
so talk a little bit about what we've learned through the last year and a half and what can be applied as we go into the in-person space. I mean, are we simply going to go back to what it was like in 2019 and kind of try to forget about what just happened? Or are we going to see more use of technology, both in the classroom and at home, maybe to encourage more personalized learning, for instance?
Yeah, I think definitely we'll take things forward. I mean, I asked that question yesterday when I was at
Oh,
the because in the past, if I gave them an assignment, they would do it like in their books, and they're like, no, got to do it on the computer. I so prefer like being able to cut and paste and look something up all at once. So they become so tech savvy, and
Hmm.
this is pretty young kids, so that will stick for sure. And teachers too. Teachers have found ed tech tools that they find so useful. They're using, I mean, everything from the Kahoot to Google Classroom to these things that just work with their school day and make it more efficient and easy for them to keep track of where their students are and to prepare for their lessons. I think all that stuff will stick. And we're seeing a lot of hybrid. Some kids really like the online learning. And so for those kids, it's wonderful because there will be more opportunities to do that in the future.
This might be a good time to bring in, I mentioned in my introduction the idea of flipped schools. For those who've never heard that term before, what in your mind is a flipped school, and how does it work? What are the pros and cons for it?
Well, I don't, the way that I interpret that is that you would spend your school day talking about the learning that happened at home. So at home, you could do anything that was online, get that done one-on-one with your computer, and then you would bring that knowledge to school, and the school day would be spent having those discussions about what you learned. And I think for kids, that's such a natural progression because they're spending time online anyway. They might as well do that work alone when you don't need to do it sitting in a classroom, and spend that classroom time, which is needed now more than ever, to have discussions and group work and all that stuff that facilitates that face-to-face connection that they've lost over the last year and a half.
Yeah, I've also kind of heard it described as basically allowing the child or the student to progress at his or her rate in a way that doesn't hold back doesn't hold back other folks in the classroom itself. And then to bring that work that they've done to talk about it individually with teacher, almost doing homework in the classroom, but then also allowing time for larger general discussion and debate rather than just having teacher talk directly at the kids. And given what we've been through, as you say, what an amazing opportunity for kids to see and hear each other in person, ironically with masks on, but and here's the irony, because we're sitting alone in our various rooms, we don't have to wear masks.
Right.
Kids got used to seeing each other face to face, as it were, on Zoom, and then have to go and hide their faces when they see each other in person. But I still think the in-person with masked experience is still a stronger, more human way of being and learning.
Yeah, especially when you hear from the kids that go, yeah, Zoom, I could do Zoom, but then I had YouTube going in the background and I
Right.
was texting my friends and I could walk away, so they're
Yeah.
more accountable person to person in person. So that's pretty
Right.
cool.
Well, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about how parents, and for that matter, families, how can they be more involved and supportive in their kids' educational lives with this new world that we're in?
Well, when I talk to parent groups, I always say like the best thing you can do is be curious and just, ask kids, what are you doing? And the thing that we forget sometimes is, largely kids are spending more time online than they are in school or with their families. So when you ask like what's going on, like ask what's going on in their online life too, because especially if you start asking that question when they're relatively young, they'll be more anxious to share with you. If you start asking that question at age 16, forget it. They're not going to tell you anything. So
No.
I think just that curiosity and to be open-minded again about their screen time, don't assume that they're wasting time. But if you ask, you might learn that they're actually learning something or connecting with friends they don't get to see. So I think that curiosity is a really important thing for parents to remember going forward.
Great, thanks. That's really helpful. Just a reminder, we're going to be taking your questions throughout this webinar. We've got a couple have already come through. This one from Gloria Russo-Wassel. I hope I pronounced that correctly. What are your thoughts on schools teaching young children, i.e. elementary and middle school, about heavy traumatic events? As a therapist, I don't agree with teaching kids about 9/11. For example, it's too soon and can result in anxiety, fears, and secondary trauma. Parents should decide, though we know there are parents who are not preventing exposure to this kind of content, and that's a different problem, which you are addressing. Thank you. What do you, how would you respond to that?
I mean, that goes back to my previous point is sadly, really young kids are getting exposed to this very,
Mm,
scary content way younger than in the old days because they're seeing stuff on these apps and on the internet in general. And so unfortunately, if that's your child and you hear about it, you're going to have that conversation whether you want to or not. And like my experience with the kids that saw that suicide on TikTok, maybe a few saw it, but they all talked about it. So they all knew about it. And, this is the world that we're living in with this content being so readily available. So I don't think teachers should bring it up, but if it's brought up by the students, I don't think you can avoid talking about it.
yeah, I would tend to agree. Another one, Amy Jessel, really important point on acknowledging the student voice when reporting content on platforms to encourage kids to outreach and validate their concerns. Would like to hear tips on what parents and educators can do to inquire about school ed tech apps and third-party data privacy. Is there a proactive list of what to know before you go kind of questions that all should ask to these folks before signing away data?
Oh, hi, Amy.
Yeah, hi, Amy.
He always has great questions, and that's a pretty complex one. But if
That really is.
I think that the nuts and bolts are privacy, right? We're talking about how can we let kids know about privacy, and this is a huge passion of mine, as it is Amy's. We hit this really hard in CyberCivics and in level 2, and we have a whole, I think it's a 10-lesson series on privacy. And one of the things that I have the students do is actually read the privacy policy of different apps. This year we're doing TikTok. And you would think that would sound super boring. The kids love it because, again, think where they are developmentally. They hate to be controlled. So they dive in and they do this in groups. So it's group work. And they find things like, Mrs. Kraber, did you know that they can take my image and use it in an ad in another country and not tell me about it? Like they find these things and they're like, that's just not right. So again, it's giving that power back to the kids. It's saying, look, if you're old enough and responsible enough to use this app, then you are also, old enough and responsible enough to read the privacy policy and tell me what you think about it and what you would change. And, do you agree to this? Is it worth it? And so I think to just remember as a parent, like these are important things, steps with your child. And if your child is 13 and they want to be on Snapchat or Instagram, sit down with them, read the privacy policy. I have a great story because I had one student years ago. Her dad, whenever she wanted to have an app on her phone, her dad made her read all this stuff and create a PowerPoint presentation about it to present to him to show her knowledge before he would let her download the app. So I'm like, that is a very proactive father.
Mm. Tell me, let's talk a little bit about a word that's been used and sometimes I wouldn't say abused, but maybe overused. But what's your feeling about resilience and the importance of teaching, showing, demonstrating resilience in our kids and students?
Yes, that's a really important one. It's funny because the group I talked to yesterday was called Raising Resilience, and that was pretty much our topic yesterday. But in my view, kids really need to be resilient when they go online and they might encounter cyberbullying or a predator or all that stuff. And they need to have that strong core so they know how to stand up to that or what to do about it. And I wrote a lot about this in my book because I call it having a strong foundation of social and emotional skills. And I think this work starts when kids are super young. I think remembering that what a young child needs is face-to-face experiences, exposure to nature. They need to be played to, talked to, all that stuff builds this really strong foundation of social and emotional skills. So for example, when they're in a preschool and they hit somebody and they see how sad that person looks, like those are the skills that teach them like, oh, I don't want to hurt somebody's feelings because I know how sad they look. So that builds that social emotional base so that when they're finally old enough to go online and they encounter people that they might want to be mean to or are mean to them, they have that resilient base. So they understand the feelings and emotions that a real person lives behind the screen.
Mm.
What to do if someone's mean to them, how to stand up for somebody else that's being cyberbullied, perhaps. All of that stuff calls on resiliency because it's a tough world out there for kids. I mean, there's a lot. Like as adults, we know I get a mean tweet ruins my day.
Right.
Imagine if you're 13 and that happens to you.
Yeah. One of the people I think about when I hear the word resilience is Lenore Skenazy. I don't know if you know her work.
Yeah,
She's the one behind Free Range Kids, the book and the movement. She
yeah,
was the one that was described as America's worst mom by putting her 10-year-old on the New York subway to ride a few stops and get off to go and see his aunt. And she it was very interesting because we did a session with her last year, right in the middle of the first few months of the pandemic. And she was seeing something that I was seeing in my neighborhood too, which was an increasing number of kids out and about without their parents. And it was partly to do that everyone was stuck at home. Mom and dad were either working from home or having to do essential jobs and come back. And the kids were all at home trying to do schoolwork. And there was just a sense of get out, just get out of the house. And kids were given freedoms, physical and to a certain extent online freedoms that they had not experienced before, ones that we took for granted as kids, climbing trees, exploring the woods, going to the store, cooking, just doing stuff like that. What's your reaction to her work and to that broader movement to allow our children more freedom?
yeah. Well, I'm a big fan of that. I mean, I live in California where I can't stand to not be outside, so
Yeah.
I do a lot of my classes outside with the students. So, yeah, it's a great movement, and I love to see the return of kids to the outdoors because I think again that's one of the things that they really need, especially when they're young. So, I love all that. And as far as freedoms, that's the thing that I think is so funny sometimes when parents are so worried about, you know, gosh, my kid's going to go outside and something terrible is going to happen. We should have that same concern or tenfold online because
Mm.
there's a lot more scary stuff that could happen online to your child than perhaps if they go to your local park, depending on where you live, of course. So I don't know. I just think getting kids outside for any reason is really good. And it is a nice thing to have happened during the pandemic. And I hope that sticks. I hope that kids realize that. And I'm seeing that with the students again, they're like kind of over their screens. And so they love the opportunity to do anything that doesn't involve their screen for the moment. So I'm hoping that will stick.
So I'm sure you must get asked this question. It's probably the number one question that we get asked, which is, at what age should I get my kid a phone? And I remember the first time I got this question years ago, and it was, what age should I get my high schooler a flip phone? And then it became middle schooler. And now we see kindergartners showing up with mom's old iPhone.
Yeah.
You know, do you have an easy answer to this one? And how has it changed, would you say, given the last 18 months?
Yeah. So I do have an easy answer because I wish I had a dime for every time I was asked that question. So I actually addressed this, I think, in the very first chapter of my book. And I also have a download of it on both of our websites, Cyberwise and CyberCivics. But I actually, when people ask me that question, I say, well, you should be able to answer these 10 questions. And it's like, does your child understand online privacy? Does your child know what to do if they're cyberbullied? Does your child understand their digital reputation? So it's 10 questions. Say, ask these things first. And if you
Mm.
say yes to these 10 things, your child's ready. If they can't, then they're not ready. So it's a very simple checklist for parents. And again, it's on our CyberWise website.
Wow. Okay, I'll have to look those questions up. I mean, what I have seen, or what we've seen, it is an emergence of another category of technology. The best so far I've seen is the Gizmo Watch. Have you come across the Gizmo?
Yeah.
Which is basically a Dick Tracy device where you can talk or text up to 10 people. It's a GPS tracker, it's a step counter, and I think there's a couple of games in there as well. But that's it. In other words, it does not give full access to the World Wide Web. It doesn't allow non-strangers to contact your child. It basically deals with the number one thing the parents say is that they want to know where their child is at
Yeah.
any time. What's your view on something like the Gizmo?
I'm just laughing because this is what makes it so hard for educators. A lot of schools that I work with have this media policy where they put their phones away, blah, blah, blah. But they forget like these kids have all these different kinds of devices on their arms, and some are connected to the internet. Some, like the Gizmo, which is great, is not. but it makes it really difficult for a school to monitor like the use of technology and personal technology in the classroom because it changes every month. And
Yeah.
so, just this is great information for a school to be aware of the difference between the things that kids wear on their wrists.
So actually, we hear from teachers quite a lot that their number one complaint is that parents are texting their kids too often. So, they're literally in the middle of a class, and mom's asking, what time are you coming home? And the parents are distracting the kids in the classroom. That just drives teachers crazy. What about, we mentioned, I think you mentioned this before, what about kids who are, shall we say, more introverted, who maybe enjoyed the solitary working at home? What advice would you give to parents of those sorts of kids who are now suddenly faced with having to go back into in-person classrooms? Or for that matter, what advice for teachers too? In other words, how do you help the reentry of kids who may have actually thrived in the online learning space, but find it really hard in person?
I think there's a lot of those kids. I mean, I've talked to a lot of them myself, and I think the number one thing for both a parent and a teacher is to recognize that. And for those kids, maybe do a hybrid situation where they're doing some of their classes online because they will do better that way. So that's a wonderful thing to have come out of the pandemic, is there's more opportunities for that going forward. And again, just recognize who those kids are and honor that and help them find those opportunities.
Yeah, yeah. We've had another question from the audience here. Akram Karamai, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Do you think education can emerge stronger after the lockdown? This is something we've touched on before, but here we go. Building on all the ed tech use and lessons learned in that area, or are we looking forward to going back to a pre-pandemic education? What's your view on that?
I don't think we're going back. I think, number one, I think teachers had a great year of trial and error, and they found things they really like ed tech wise, especially, and I work with a lot of teachers that were really tech averse, and now they're like, this is awesome. This is making my school day easier. So I think that will stick. Plus, like we just talked about, some kids really thrived with online environments. So I think we learned a lot of lessons. And so, I mean, this is going to sound crazy to say, but wow, we just were thrown into the fire and we came out with these new learnings that I think we're going to hold on to going forward.
My hope too. And I can remember 4, 5, 6 years ago, the MacArthur Foundation were hosting these sometimes 2-day long in-person sessions on reimagining education, and technology was at the heart of that, and harnessing its power and its reach in a way to upend the school structure. One of the ideas led to this notion of the flipped classroom, but there are many others. But I mean, I guess what happened in March of last year was, we just suddenly went into that experiment.
Right.
And not just in the US, I mean, globally. I mentioned earlier on when I was introducing you that you work internationally. What are you seeing in other parts of the world that you think we should emulate here?
Well, I want to just piggyback on what you said. Like, one thing for me personally that's been so wonderful is I used to spend so much time on planes, like spending forever to get to like one little school to make a presentation, and it cost them a lot of money. And so now it's so much more cost effective to do Zoom presentations to parents, and the participation is so much higher because parents are busy. They don't have time to go drive to the school and all that. They can just turn it on while they're making dinner and listen. And I just like that. For me, it's great for me. It's great for them. It's great for the school. So I see that happening so much more. And I've been able to do some international things that before they probably would not be able to afford to bring me to do. And now it's like, hey, I can be in England, and like still go for my bike ride right afterwards.
Right.
So
Right.
that is just a huge plus, I think.
So that's in terms of you delivering stuff. What are you hearing or even seeing over Zoom differences that we could learn from here?
Well, I think we're kind of all in the same boat. I mean, for example, we have this series of schools that just signed up in New Zealand, and they're struggling with us going online and then offline and then online and offline. I mean, I honestly don't see a lot of difference with the schools in other countries that we're working with. They're, you know, they'll have a great couple of months and then they'll have something, an uprise because of the Delta variant, and have to go online again. And we're kind of all in this together.
Yeah,
So I wish I could tell you that some places doing it better or having a better experience, but it's kind of all the same as far as I can tell.
right, right. Another question from the audience, Chantal Virgil. It's been very difficult to have a voice in education as a parent. How should parents advocate for a responsible integration of online tech learning moving forward? How can parents be more involved with school policies?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, it really depends on where you live and what kind of system your child's involved with. But, you know, I struggle with that personally with CyberCivics because for us, it's very easy to get into a charter school or a private school, much harder to break into a traditional public school because it's so entrenched on how things are done. So
Mhm.
the best advice I can give is just get as involved as you can, go to your parent meetings, go to your district meetings, let your voice be heard, get a group of parents to let your voice be heard. I mean, sadly, change happens slowly in the traditional school setting, but it does happen. And like everything that involves our kids, it just takes us making the time and having our voices be heard.
Speaking of which, yeah, how can we as parents better support our kids' teachers? Is there, apart from showing up at PTA meetings and so on, are there concrete ways in which we can help them?
Yeah. Well, I think for teachers, I mean, first of all, just thank you for the last year and a half. They went through a
Hmm.
lot, and just being aware of that, what they deal with all the time. It's so funny because, I came into teaching through, media psychology and just this, they threw me in there to teach these classes.
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm by happenstance, now I'm a teacher. And the first thing I said was, boy, anybody that has a kid in elementary school, especially, should spend a day in a classroom, just one
Hmm.
day.
Hmm.
You will have such an appreciation for how hard that job is and how hard teachers work. And their day does not end at 3 o'clock. And especially now that there's email. And one thing I would say is just to be respectful of teachers' time after school and the weekends, like let them have a little family time before they're barraged with questions and all that. And just to be, so grateful for the hard work that they do.
I would take it a step further. In our local high school in Rockville, which my daughter attended, they had once a year invited parents to come in and give classes about the work that they did,
Yeah.
or the career that they followed, or the crafts that they were into, or whatever. And you would be given 40-minute slots, and kids would file in, and a teacher would introduce you, and that was it. You were on. And I remembered vividly doing that. And I had a couple of remedial classes too. And I had 6 or 7 kids in this class, each one of them with an adult minder, if you will, and trying to engage this class. I had nothing but respect for teachers after that experience.
Yeah.
Um, so that's something that those of you listening in might want to encourage your own school to do. Afterwards, in the main hall, they had a fair, and you were given a tabletop to then talk about your work to all the other kids that you didn't have a chance to talk to, or for that matter, kids would come up to you and ask you questions that they didn't have a chance to in the class. And it just blew my mind to see what it took to keep a class of 15, 20, 25 kids live, looking at you and interacting with you over 40 minutes. It was a great experience.
Yeah, and it's
Um,
hard. I find it a little harder this year because the kids are so enthusiastic to be back in the classroom. I mean, granted, it's still September, and especially I'm hearing this from a lot of teachers with younger kids. Those kids don't have any classroom management skills because they have not been in a classroom. So, for the younger kids, knowing to raise a hand, it's like, what? I can't just talk whenever I feel like talking. Like all of those skills were missed for a year and a
Yeah.
half. And
Yeah.
so teachers are really having to catch up to teach those management, how to be in a classroom skills.
Right. Um, so quick comment from Mary Gugesberg. Stephen, great suggestion to invite parents. I'm hearing the challenge of getting the kids caught up after a year of online learning. Um, I'm gonna switch gears again. You mentioned that you're involved with a Waldorf school. When we lived in the UK, my elder daughter went to what was called a Rudolf Steiner school, which of course is the same as Waldorf, just a different name. For the folks listening in who may not have ever heard of it, just give us a little description of a Waldorf school, and for that matter, their notions that they've been developing around technology and digital citizenship.
Yeah. So it's kind of an interesting story because traditionally they're known as the non-tech schools and people may have heard of them. There was a famous article years ago in the New York Times about a Waldorf school in the Silicon Valley. There's a lot of them in that area where a lot of parents who are very involved in tech send their kids to these kinds of schools because they like the fact that they don't use technology at all until middle school now. So they kind of had this reputation of non-tech. But I have to give kudos to the Waldorf schools because my kids attended a public charter Waldorf school in Southern California, which is where we started CyberCivics. And those schools were the first ones to adopt our curriculum. We're now, I think we're in like 95% of Waldorf schools in the US and a lot internationally. So I just want to say this, like previously non-tech schools have devoted an hour a week, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade to teach digital citizenship, digital literacy, information literacy, media literacy. So they are all on board. They understand how important it is for kids to get these skills so that they use technology safely and wisely. And I just have to give them kudos for that 360. I mean, think about where they've come in 10 years, right? And they
Yeah.
really are leaders in the fact that they make time for this kind of education in the classroom. So since then, now we're in a lot more mainstream classes, but I really am so grateful to these schools because they've stuck with their thing where younger kids, let's do hands-on outdoor experiences. This is how I know about the free range people. All of that is a priority with their younger kids, but they realize now that come middle school, kids need to learn how to use technology in really productive, positive ways.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah, it is a pretty remarkable shift given when my older daughter was in kindergarten, there was basically, you weren't really meant to teach them reading until age 7, for instance, but explore nature and do fairy tales and, arts and crafts and cooking and all that sort of lovely things, but it was very much discounted, never mind technology. But I think it's remarkable where they've come. A couple more questions. Alma Hughes, thinking about our preschoolers and kindergartners moving forward, how much of a negative impact can or will this pandemic have on them? While they are looking pretty with wearing their masks, do you think they understand the real reasons why they are wearing them?
I mean, that's a great question. And what I think about when I think about young kids on masks is the opportunities they're missing to read facial expressions.
Yeah.
It's so important to do that. And while we talk about limiting tech for our youngest kids, there is one type of technology that the research shows is positive for even very young children. And that's what we're doing now. The Zooming, the Skyping, all of that, put your kid on the lap, talk to grandma, because that's their opportunity to learn how to read facial expressions, emotion, and that's so important for a young child. So if you can, I mean, it makes me sad to see the little kids with the masks because I know, a lot of things are being missed. They meant, like you said, they may not even know why they have them on, but it is impeding their ability to read facial expression.
I recently did an online safety class at a middle school in Washington, D.C., and got into a discussion, and the kids expressed their number one complaint about their parents, which is they couldn't get their parents' attention. Mom's always on her laptop. Dad's always just checking his email at dinner. And for us to be literally dropping the ball when our masks are off at home to give our kids not just attention, but the full facial expressions as well when they're not getting it externally it broke my heart when I heard them talking like this. And it was the converse of what, parents are complaining about their kids always are on their devices. Well, parents are saying that about us as well.
Yeah, I hear that so much. And one of the activities that we do in CyberCivics is the kids go on a screen media vacation, 24 hours without digital media. And so we have activities for the families to do together. And that's one where we ask the parents to also go the 24 hours. And the kids are always like, oh, bad idea, ain't gonna happen. My parent has to have their phone because of this. And I'm thinking, who has to have their phone really? And lo and behold, I get little, their essays afterwards like, well, I did it, but it was really hard because my parents couldn't do it. And so we can't complain about our kids if we can't model it ourselves.
Be a good digital role model yourself, which is our number 7 of our 7 steps to good digital parenting. Wonderful book by Tiffany Shlain on this called 24/6, about her experience, 10-year experience of having internet Sabbaths every week. Another question here from Lawrence Balter. What tips do you have for teachers for conducting discussions about the past year and a half away from school and its impact on their lives? Are they concerned about their health and or their parents' health, even though they are enthusiastic about being back? Isn't there ambivalence?
Yeah. So one thing that I do whenever I enter a classroom and I'm about to teach a lesson, I kind of take the temperature of what's happening. And kids will be very anxious to tell you. And a lot of times what they bring up are things that have happened in their online life that they all seem to know about because they're all connected that way. And I think more than ever, this is an important time to make time for that because there's a lot of things happening that they need to discuss. They may not be comfortable taking it to their parents, sadly. So to do it in a classroom with their peers where you can kind of diffuse it, talk about it, just super important to make time for that. And integrate it into whatever you're teaching. I mean, for me, it's easy because I'm teaching digital literacy, so we can talk about what happened this week, But I think you can do that in any kind of class. Just take their temperature and see what's living in the classroom and spend a little time addressing it before you dive into whatever your lesson is.
We have a question, an anonymous question about basically my daughter has an Instagram, but her friends are begging her to get a TikTok. How can I explain to her about the fact that she can only have a limited number of accounts and that everyone's family rules are different?
Yeah.
So peer pressure, how do you deal with peer pressure?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And so that was something I really thought about as I was writing my book. And so I wrote a discussion guide to go along with it. And I pretty much plead parents and teachers to read a chapter together and then have a book club where you discuss those issues, because that gets you all on the same page. And that's what our kids really need. They need to have the support of their community because it is super hard for a kid when all their friends are on TikTok talking about something or Instagram, whatever, and they're left out. I mean, that's hard for a kid. So if you can come to mutual agreements, maybe, hey, let's all wait till they're 13, or let's all decide that till 9 o'clock at night, just whatever your mutual agreements are, your values together as a community, is going to make life so much easier for your kids.
Yeah, I've done a large number of PTA meetings over the years, and 1 or 2 that have been particularly successful, one in a middle school and one in a high school, where they all came together and agreed that there would be a curfew of 9 p.m. for the middle school kids, and the high school was 10 p.m. In other words, all the parents signed up. Now, whether or not everyone adhered to it is another matter. But in other words, you're going to place your phone, your laptop, your tablet, whatever, in the charging closet at 9 p.m. if you're a middle schooler, 10 p.m. if you're a high schooler. So there won't be that pressure to be online to midnight, to 1 till 2 in the morning, which is precisely what we found our daughter when she was at high school, texting at 2 in the morning, not because she initiated, but because kids were texting her. So those sorts of, classroom-wide or school-wide voluntary restrictions are incredibly powerful.
They're so
It
powerful.
takes the pressure off the kids. It also helps the parents. I know that I think there was a town in South Korea that actually made it an ordinance that you had to be off your phone at 9 p.m. Now, I don't know if the police ever came around and arrested anyone for it. And we're not suggesting that that's what we're suggesting here. But I just think those kind of voluntary rules that everyone can sign up to is a good way to go.
Yeah, that's one of the lessons we do in 6th grade where the kids, it's the norming lesson. And so they work in groups and they say, these are the norms that we would like within our own community. And it's them, they're deciding for themselves what they would like. And almost every year the kids decide, okay, let's not text each other after this time and let's not text each other before this time. And those are the norms that work because they come from the kids themselves and they stick they write them on a little poster board. We put them around the classroom. And I think that is the best way to do it. If you can get kids in groups to decide what they think are appropriate norms for their online world.
Well, I think that also applies when you're developing household rules as well. So we have we have a family online safety agreement that has some suggested ideas, but the most important part of the agreement is the blank spaces. Wow. And this is where you say to your kids, okay, what do you think should be the rules? And by the way, they're very creative when it comes to their younger brothers and sisters. I really don't want Tiffany on Facebook until she's at least 16, this kind of stuff. But no, involve them, engage them, and involve them in what should the sanctions be. If we do find you online at 2 a.m, what do you think should be the penalty? And
their penalties are often way worse than a parent would ever come up with.
You should take my phone away for a month. I actually saw a kid say that. We're like, no, it's not that, we don't have to be that severe. But yeah, so engage them, get them to be part of the rule making and the sanctions, because if you don't have sanctions, you don't have rules. Yeah. So that they don't even complain when stuff happens, and stuff will happen because they were part of it.
Yeah, and I want to underscore something you said because it's so important. If you ask any middle or high school student what they would say for their younger siblings, they would be so much more strict than a parent because they know. And so I think we need to listen to that, because I've experienced that too, where they say, gosh, I don't think my younger siblings should use any of these until they're 16 or whatever. Yeah. They've been there, done that, and they know that it sucks you in, it takes your time, and they know the kind of content that they're being exposed to.
For sure. We have another question here, David Savalain. Have you found particular media to be most effective in reaching both students and parents when providing tools and advice about online safety? From printables for classrooms to social media advertising, it is hard to know which methods are effective in reaching both eyes and minds, particularly when classrooms are hybrid. Wow. Yeah. Big question there.
Yeah. So, that's exactly the reason we developed CyberCivics, because it's hard to know what to introduce when. And I'll tell you, the biggest thing that I've learned working with kids is it needs to be like build on skills. It's a big, complex world out there. And to just come at kids one day about advertising without the context of like, well, how does advertising happen and who pays for it? And what is, like you have to almost build like, here's what the internet is, here's what digital citizenship is, here's where your digital reputation is so important, but then cyberbullying happens, and then build on top of that about information literacy, and then finally media literacy. And that's the thing that's so hard for just a parent or teacher to know, is find the time and to know how to introduce these lessons sequentially and to wait till the appropriate time. That's a big thing too, because kids it takes about 12 to 13 years for a kid to develop abstract thinking, which is the prerequisite of practical thinking. So kids can't really think through the complexities of online life until they're about 12 or 13. Yeah. So a child younger than that, when you're teaching them about these things, you're not really teaching them to think through the consequences of their action. You're teaching them yes and no, right and wrong.
Right.
So the way that you would teach a younger child is so different from how you would teach middle school and up.
Sure.
So I don't know that I helped this poor person at all. Sorry. But that was what you're facing is what I faced. There was just a mishmash of tools and things to teach kids, but they weren't put together sequentially in a way that made sense to kids developmentally.
Yeah, yeah. All right, I think we have time for one more. Taylor Blatchford has sent this note, and this is interesting. As a college student attending this webinar, how do you think the digital literacy students are being equipped with today? How do you think the digital literacy students are being equipped with today will impact them as adults and future professionals? It is personally very hard to say from my generation, because we can remember being without this kind of technology, but are digitally literate having access to it now. How do you think this will differ with the younger students we are discussing in the future?
Well, I wondered that question myself, because number one, most kids are not being equipped with digital literacy, which is a travesty in my mind. But I was curious because now I'm in this 12 years. And so I had my research assistant go back and interview some of the very first students I taught 10 years ago. And the big takeaways were this. Number one, she felt like they used it a lot less than other kids. They were able to take breaks and walk away. They didn't feel owned by their technologies because they understood, dopamine in the brain and all that. Number two, they were very aware of their digital reputation. They were very careful about what they put online. And then number three, they were able to detect misinformation. Like they did not believe things that they saw online unless they verified it. So I felt like those are three really important things to stick. If I had to choose three things to stick, that would be the three things. So, but again, I mean, I had the difference here, these kids who just had this year after year after year. And it's funny because one of the boys said, yeah, Mrs. Graber used to really hound us about our reputations. Like this is before Instagram was even invented.
Yeah,
And now I get it. Now I understand how that was important. So
sure. Actually, we do have one more has slipped in here through the chat function. Our good friend Joe Laramie, how would you develop the kids to develop appropriate norms for sharing explicit sexts, as in sexting, and not blame the originator, but identify the person sharing without permission as the violator of trust?
I don't know if I understand that question.
Let's see. Well, first of all, Joe comes from law enforcement. He's spoken at and attended many of our events over the years. I'm reading this, the second half of this anyway, not blaming the originator, but identify the person sharing without permission as the violator of trust. So, a nude photograph is going through the school. Maybe a boy or a girl took it without really thinking and shared it with what they thought was their boyfriend or girlfriend. And it was that person who was then sending it around. So that's, instead of shaming the person who is in the photograph, how do we make the person who's doing the sharing without permission responsible?
Yeah. So that goes back to education. I think teaching kids about sexting when they're younger, middle school, before high school, and just the consequences of it, and to talk about these different scenarios. It's interesting because my colleague that works with me, Peter, used to be a high school teacher, and this exact incident happened at his high school. A cheerleader shared her picture with a boyfriend, and they broke up, and he shared it around, and she was shamed and ended up getting kicked off the cheerleading squad. And so I think having those discussions earlier and the consequences, and that goes back to having empathy and to be responsible, and what kind of digital citizen are you? I mean, those are things that should be discussed way in advance. And when I talked about context, to understand, if you're going to be online, you should be responsible, you should be respectful, you should be empathetic, and just hound those things in. So hopefully these events won't happen. And the other thing is, there's other parties to this. There's the kids who receive the sext messages or maybe share or laugh about it. And hopefully you want upstanders there that go like, this is not cool. I'm going to delete it. I'm going to tell the person not to share it anymore. I mean, you want to create that environment where kids are upstanding and know what to do.
Well, very good place to conclude. I also think that speaks to the question of resilience that we talked about earlier. today too.
Exactly.
All right. Well, listen, we're right out of time. Thank you so much, Diana,
Oh, it was a pleasure.
for being with us, sharing your wisdom, your expertise and experience. I want to thank everyone who's tuned in for the wonderful questions and comments we had throughout the webinar. Just want to mention that we're going to be exploring these and many other topics at our annual conference on November 15th. We're entitling it Recovery and Renewal. So we're trying to keep it half glass full in terms of the attitude that we're taking here. And we very much hope that you all can join us on that day. So thank you again, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you
Thanks so
so
much.
much. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Cheers, Dana. Bye-bye.